Part 8 of Bright Ideas, a PTI Nebraska workshop on special education law, continues our examination of the Individualized Education Program. We've already noted that the I.E.P. document must contain any exceptions to the behavioral and academic expectations set out in school policy. Periodically, the Nebraska State Education Agency or a local school district will perform statewide or district-wide standardized testing in order to assess its students against a national or statewide norm. All children throughout the state or the district will participate in these tests, including those in special education programs. The state or district has developed and implemented guidelines for the inclusion of children with disabilities in these standardized tests, using alternate assessments that are aligned with the challenging academic standards of regular assessment. In this manner, children with disabilities are included in statewide statistical analyses right along with their non-disabled peers. When accommodations or alternate assessments are appropriate, such as reading the test to the child, giving the child extra time, or allowing the use of a calculator, they must be indicated in each child's respective I.E.P. document. Otherwise, the child is held to the same norm as the rest of the population. Really, it's never too early to begin thinking about your child's transition from school to real life. But preparation in earnest begins no later than the first I.E.P. to be in effect when the child is 16 and is updated annually thereafter. Essentially, transition issues add several requirements to the I.E.P. document, which the I.E.P. team must begin to consider. These include planning of post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate assessments related to training, education, employment, and, where appropriate, independent living skills. Transition from a secondary education environment to the child's post-secondary world is such a huge issue that PTI Nebraska has an entire workshop devoted just to this issue. You're invited to contact PTI Nebraska at 800-284-8520 for detailed information specific to your child's transition from special education. In a mobile society such as ours, it's not uncommon for children to be removed from one school district and placed in another across town, across the state, or even several states away. Given the amount of leeway individual states and even school districts have in implementing I.D.E.A., the federal law has some very common-sense guidelines for these situations. FAPE, the requirement that the child receive a free, appropriate public education, reigns. The new school district is to follow the most recent I.E.P. from the old district, offering identical to the extent possible or comparable services until such time as the new district either adopts and adjusts the previous I.E.P., conducting a new evaluation if needed in the case of a transfer out of state, or develops a new I.E.P. of its own. The new school must attempt to retrieve the child's records from the old school, and the previous school must take steps to respond to the new school's request. However, you can make the transition smoother by requesting a complete set of records from your child's old school before you relocate. It will be greatly appreciated by the new school if you can walk into your first conference with all of your child's pertinent records in hand. In the course of developing the I.E.P. document, certain special factors are explicitly mentioned in the federal regulations for consideration by I.E.P. teams. First, in the case of a child whose behavior impedes either his or her own learning or that of others, the I.E.P. team must consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address this behavior. Second, since a child's communication needs are extremely important, if a child has only limited proficiency in English, the I.E.P. team must consider the child's language needs as they relate to the I.E.P. Similarly, for a child with impaired vision, the team must provide for instruction in Braille and the use of Braille, Unless the team determines, through evaluation of the child's reading and writing skills, along with an evaluation of the child's future need for the use of Braille, that instruction in Braille is not appropriate. For a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, the I.E.P. team must consider the child's language and communication needs and provide opportunities for direct communication with peers in his or her own language and communication mode. The team must gauge the child's academic level and address the full range of needs, including direct instruction in the child's language and communication mode. The team must also consider whether the child needs an assistive technology device or service for basic communication. You can see that the I.E.P. is no slapdash proposal. It needs to be carefully thought out and decisions weighed to create the most appropriate course of action to prevent the child's disability from interfering with a free and appropriate public education. Once the I.E.P. program has been developed and the I.E.P. document drawn up, its implementation begins. Your child's placement is determined and his or her progress monitored according to the guidelines set out in the I.E.P. document. But that's not the end of the process. At least once every year, the I.E.P. team must reconvene to review your child's I.E.P. document to see if the annual goals set out in the I.E.P. have been met. If they have, the team may determine to continue to provide the same services to the child after resetting the annual goals toward further progress. If not, the team will want to revise the I.E.P. as appropriate to address the lack of expected progress, both toward the goals set out in the I.E.P. and toward progress in the general education curriculum. Your child's regular education teacher, as a member of the I.E.P. team, should participate in the review and any revision of the I.E.P. document. In some instances, a lack of progress may trigger a re-evaluation, and its results will need to be taken into consideration in a revised I.E.P. At times, the I.E.P. will need to be revised not because of lack of progress, but because of new information about the child provided to or by the parents. Goals and expectations may change as the child develops, and the direction thought to be most appropriate at one time may seem immaterial in light of new development. A shift in the anticipated needs or just the basic interests of the child may require a revision of the I.E.P. Whatever the case, your child is not static in development, and the I.E.P. cannot be a static document. The law requires that the I.E.P. document be reviewed at least annually. However, you may call the I.E.P. team together at any time you sense that the I.E.P. is out of touch with or no longer functioning properly for the appropriate guidance of your child. Whenever things are going smoothly, though, it's also possible within the law for you and your child's school personnel to agree to forego a meeting of the full team to rewrite your child's I.E.P. from the ground up, but instead develop a written page of amendments to the existing I.E.P. In fact, consolidation of meetings for such purposes as evaluations and I.E.P. creation is encouraged in order to reduce the burden on school personnel. Naturally, you're entitled to, and you should ensure that you receive, a copy of all documentation that results from such informal proceedings. Anytime you're working on the development or revision of your child's I.E.P., keep the following questions in mind and be sure you have the answers to all of them before signing the I.E.P. document. 1. Are the goals set out for your child measurable? And how are they to be measured? 2. Is your child going to be placed in the regular education environment for all or part of the day? If not, why not? 3. Does the I.E.P. list specific modifications, accommodations, and supports, either for your child or for school personnel, to help overcome the effects of the disability? Are there accommodations listed for statewide and district-wide testing? 4. Do school personnel expect the kind of progress from your child that you believe he or she should make? If not, what are the limitations? 5. Is your child expected and able to meet graduation requirements? If not, why not? 6. When will the IEP next be reviewed, and when will the next re-evaluation take place? While it's not good to set the child up for failure by setting unattainable goals in the IEP, neither is it helpful to set goals so low that the child isn't challenged. Any child will generally rise to the lowest expectations of others. This brings us to the end of Part 8 of Bright Ideas. Part 9 begins with your child's placement according to the newly developed IEP document.